today's episode, we're going to be talking about a town in Australia, but this isn't like any regular town. You see, this is a town that they want you to forget about. There's a lot of people and a lot of videos out there that talk about the incidences that occurred around Chernobyl and how catastrophic it was. But there's an incident that occurred in Australia, but unlike Chernobyl, this was going on for years, and nobody raised the alarms. Nobody said anything or spoke up until it was too late. This town claimed the lives of over 2,000 people, and instead of talking about this in documentaries, instead of covering this in history lessons, they'd rather you forget it. So much so that the town has actually been removed from any maps that you can find. If you're new here, my name's Marcus, and we dive into the scarier side of Australia, the darker, more niche aspects of our country, because I truly believe Australia is one of the scariest countries in the world, but not enough people talk about it. If you are a returning viewer, as always, thank you so much. I see you. Now tonight, we're smashing down a nice cold V sugar-free energy drink. So kick back, relax, grab a drink, and let's get into the story of Australia's deadliest town that they want you to forget. My globe just died, but hopefully that adds to the ambience of the video. So like I stated in the introduction, if you try to find this town, it doesn't appear on maps, but roughly 1,400 kilometers from Perth, out in the Pilbara region, there is a town, and we do remember that town, and that town was known as Wittenoom. Now, the township of Wittenoom received its name because of the Wittenoom gorges in the area. And the interesting thing about the gorges, back in 1908, they discovered that it was filled with asbestos. Now, along the outskirts of the Wittenoom Gorge, there was a station known as Mulga Downs, and the owner of Mulga Downs was a man named Lang Hancock. Now, if the name Lang Hancock doesn't ring a bell to you, I'm sure that you've probably heard Lang's daughter's name in conversation more than ever. So we're talking about that big mining family. From 1936 to 1940, Lang actually started to build quite a big operation surrounding the mining of asbestos, and then in 1940 he actually moved in with his team into Wittenoom Gorge, and then in 1943 they had actually sold off this mining operation to a company called Australian Blue Asbestos. Now what's interesting is Australian Blue Asbestos, that was actually a subsidiary of CSR. And I'm talking about the same CSR that you would have seen in your kitchen, CSR Sugar. Well, that's who purchased the operation. So once CSR purchased this mining operation, it actually ran from 1943 to 1966. But in 1947, that's when they actually founded the town of Wittenoom, and Wittenoom was gazetted. So this was a real town. And this town had roughly 13,000 people living there, all a part of this mining operation. It was a mining town in the Pilbara. And you need to understand, the Commonwealth government, they were extremely for this operation. They saw it as a way to open up so many new jobs and build population and growth in the northwest of Australia. But in 1966, the mine site shut down. The entire operation actually closed. And sadly, the reason for that wasn't because of how dangerous asbestos was. At this point in time, people were talking about asbestos and people understood the risks, but they actually shut the mine site down because it wasn't profitable enough. You see, at the time there were two big competitors mining for blue asbestos, Australia and South Africa. And South Africa had a much better product than Australia, and it was a lot cheaper. Now this is where the story starts to take a darker turn, and where the town of Wittenoom itself would go down as a black mark in Australian history, because you see, the asbestos they were mining in Wittenoom, it was crocodilite, and crocodilite is known as blue asbestos. Now, if asbestos exposure wasn't bad enough, crocodilite, blue asbestos, was known as the most deadly asbestos there is. And the real dangers of asbestos, they come from inhaling the fibers. They've got extremely small micro-thin fibers, and when it gets picked up, it will just look like dust. But inhaling this asbestos is extremely dangerous. It does not take much for it to become airborne. Even walking past a pile of asbestos is enough for the spores to get thrown into the air. But not just that, asbestos, it can stick to your clothes, to your tools, to your car. This stuff is dangerous, especially when airborne. But two of the biggest dangers that actually occur from exposure to asbestos is mesothelioma, which is a cancer that lines itself along your vital organs like the lungs, and asbestosis, where asbestos cells actually line themselves along your lungs and scar them, slowly taking away your breath, making it harder and harder to breathe until it kills you. And what I find extremely frightening is it can take 20 to 50 years after exposure for the damage to be done. So then think about anything else in your day-to-day life that you might be getting exposed to that has a prolonged effect, that might be sitting there dormant, just waiting. Little side note, but I used to work in the construction industry for 10 years, and the amount of exposure we had to MDF and silica is ridiculous. And now it is coming out that these types of materials as well are just as hazardous. Because in the late 1800s, doctors were already starting to talk about the effects of asbestos on asbestos workers. And in the 1920s, the very first case of asbestosis was verified in the United Kingdom. So prior to this mining operation beginning, people and healthcare organizations knew the dangers of asbestos. And in 1962, a very well-respected doctor named Dr. Jim McNulty actually found the very first case of mesothelioma, and he linked that directly to a worker from Wittenoom. And since that first worker was diagnosed with mesothelioma in 1962, over 2,000 people have died from asbestosis and mesothelioma. And like I stated at the start of this video, there were 13,000 men, women, and children that were living in Wittenoom, along with the 7,000 miners. And because the crocodile became so airborne and it could grab onto your clothing, your vehicles, or the wind could blow it for fucking kilometers. And the more and more this mining operation ripped and tore into the earth, pulling out this dangerous material, the more the town of Wittenoom got engulfed in this. And studies have shown that even people that lived in Wittenoom for up to 11 weeks were dying from asbestos-related diseases. Now, this is why I relate this back to Chernobyl, because the amount of people affected and the small time duration it takes for this to actually get into your body and take effect is not very long. Now, it wasn't just the miners' families and the miners themselves that were getting affected by this mining operation. You see, in the area of Wittenoom, that is Banijima country.
Very close to the park, and Wittenoom Gorge itself is just over the ridge over here. And, we always talk about asbestos.
A lot of Indigenous mobs out there that were getting affected as well by the spores getting thrown around. There was literally a study conducted in 2016, so only 10 years ago, where First Nations people of Western Australia that were suffering from mesothelioma, 26 of 39 of those people could be directly linked back to Wittenoom. And what's even worse is when Western Australia's parliament was questioned on this and questioned about the First Nation workers, they actually came forward concluding that majority of the workers from First Nations backgrounds were not recorded having been working at Wittenoom. They were never bloody recorded. So the death toll, while it says it is 2,000, it could be at 3,000, it could be at more, because all of the fatalities that occurred to First Nations Australians, they're not recorded. And there might be some people sitting back going, well, the people that were mining crocodile would have known the risks. The fact of the matter is, the organisation knew the risks. The workers did not. Here's where this story gets dark, because that doctor that found the very first case of mesothelioma, he actually reported that directly to management of CSR and ABA. He let CSR and ABA know that even transitory exposure to crocodile could lead to tumours. He took this to them directly. And it wasn't just Dr. McNulty that was pushing back on this and bringing this to light. There were warnings that were going out to CSRs, consulting doctors in the mine site, asking them to get professional inspections conducted by ventilation engineers. The Asbestos Society have actually come out and stated that there is absolutely no possibility that CSR did not know about the risks of this mining operation. So you might be thinking at this point, well, Marcus, what happened to all of the workers that were affected? Did they seek compensation? Did they win? Well, the very first case that came forward was from a man named Cornelius Mass. And what's even sadder is, Cornelius Mass, he actually died before his case ever made it to court. And that's the same story for a lot of people that met their fate out at Wittenoom. You see, there are claims online where people believe allegedly that the company intentionally pushed back court proceedings for as long as possible. Why? Because they knew that there was a ticking clock occurring in all of the people that were suing them. And in 1966, this operation, it shut down. But it was never because of the safety of its workers or the communities affected, no. The mine just stopped making profit. South Africa had a much better operation moving at the time, a much cheaper operation with better material. Wittenoom Gorge was no more. But even though the mining operation shut down, and asbestos was still flying through the air of Wittenoom, the town itself wasn't actually abandoned until 1992, when the government started demolishing houses and removing services. And in December of 2006, Western Australia officially removed the town's status and shut off the power grid. And as it stands right now, the Western Australian government, they believe that the asbestos management area of Wittenoom spans roughly 46,500 hectares. It's been stated that within that 46,500 hectares of land in the Australian desert, well, it will never be safe for human habitation. There is uninhabitable land out in the Pilbara, completely fenced off and removed from any future maps so that people don't accidentally stumble upon it. And not enough people talk about Australia's deadliest town. Not enough people even know about it. Which, if you ask me, is exactly what they want. Before the conclusion of this video, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the families that were affected by the Wittenoom mining operation. All of the children that never had a choice, that eventually ended up losing their voice, losing the ability to breathe. All of the workers that never received justice. This is why we need to continue sharing these stories and be the voice for the people that never got one. Legends, if you're still here, thank you so much for tuning in. And I want to acknowledge that we do always dive into the realm of darkness surrounding Australia and the darker corners of Australia. But that doesn't mean that we always get enjoyment out of sharing these stories. And this one was a difficult story to share. And I think I'm going to end the video there. I don't feel like plugging anything.